This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sir.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. Well, today is May Day. It's the 1st of May 2025. It's also Poetry Day Ireland. And there's going to be lots of events and poetry readings and poetry-related activities happening all over the country today. So thanks to Poetry Ireland for all their support. And we thought it would be good to do all things poetry today on the podcast. So we will be talking about Strokestown Poetry Festival, which kicks off with the May Bank holiday down in Strokestown in Roscommon. It starts on Friday, May the 2nd, and it works through until Sunday, the 4th of May. It's going to be lots of exciting things happening there. So Peter and I were great supporters of that festival, and we'll talk about that later. And we'll also be featuring the 5 shortlisted poets for this year's Strokestown International Poetry Competition, and the judge this year was Jane Clark. But poetry is international, of course, and so today we thought that we would cross the Atlantic and we would speak to award-winning poet Richard Blanco about his new and selected poems, Homeland of My Body.
Looking for the Gulf Motel, Marco Island, Florida. There should be nothing here I don't remember. The Gulf Motel with mermaid lampposts and ship's wheel in the lobby should still be rising out of the sand like a cake decoration. My brother and I should still be pretending we don't know our parents, embarrassing us as they roll the luggage cart past the front desk, loaded with our scruffy suitcases, 24 loaves of Cuban bread, brown bags bulging with enough mangoes to last the entire week, our espresso pot, the pressure cooker, and a pork roast reeking garlic through the lobby. All because we can't afford to eat out, mijo. Not even on a vacation. Only 2 hours from our home in Miami, but far enough away to be thrilled by the wider sands on the west coast of Florida, where I should still be, for the first time, watching the sun set instead of rise over the ocean. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My mother should still be in the kitchenette of the Gulf Motel, her daisy sandals from Kmart still squeaking across the linoleum, still gorgeous, in her teal swimsuit and amber earrings, stirring a pot of arroz con pollo, adding sprinkles of onion powder and dollops of tomato sauce. My father should still be in a terry cloth jacket, smoking, clinking a glass of amber whiskey in the sunset at the Gulf Motel, watching us dive into the pool, 2 boys he'll never see grow into men who will be proud of him. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother and I should still be playing parcheesi. My father should still be alive, slow dancing with my mother on the sliding glass balcony of the Gulf Motel. No music, only the waves keeping time. A song only their minds hear, 10,000 nights back to their life in Cuba. My mother's face should still be resting against his bare chest, like the moon resting on the sea. And the stars should still be turning around them. There should be nothing here I don't remember. My brother should still be 13, sneaking rum in the bathroom and sculpting naked women from sand. And I should still be 8 years old, dazzled by seashells and how many seconds I can hold my breath underwater. But I'm not. I'm 38, driving up Collier Boulevard, looking for the Gulf Motel, for everything that should still be, but isn't. I want to blame the condos, their shadows for ruining the beach and my past. I want to chase the snowbirds away with their tacky mansions and yachts. I want to turn the golf courses back into mangroves. I want to find the Gulf Motel exactly as it was and pretend for a moment nothing lost is lost.
And that was the poet Richard Blanco reading his poem Looking for the Gulf Motel from Homeland of My Body, New and Selected Poems. I really enjoyed hearing that poem, Richard. It's got a great celebratory energy to it, a huge exuberance, but also it's so poignant, bringing you back to that sense of a childhood gone. Well, Richard Blanco was born in Madrid, but he came to the United States as a child with his Cuban exile family. He was raised in Miami. He earned a BS in civil engineering and an MFA in creative creative writing from Florida International University. Blanco has been a practicing engineer, writer and poet since 1991. His collections of poetry include Homeland of My Body, New and Selected Poems, City of 100 Fires, which won the Agnes Durrett Poetry Prize, Directions to the Beach of the Dead, winner of the PEN American Beyond Margins Award, Looking for the Gulf Motel, which came out in 2012, which was winner of the Thom Gunn Award, the Main Literary Award and the Patterson Prize. One Today, Boston Strong, which came out in 2013, and How to Love a Country, that came out in 2019.
And in 2013, Richard Blanco was chosen to serve as the 5th inaugural poet of the United States. He performed One Today, an original poem he wrote for the occasion, becoming the youngest first Latino immigrant and openly gay writer to hold that honour. He's received numerous awards and honours for his writings and performances, published 2 memoirs, For All of Us, One Today, and the Prince of Los Cocoyos, which received the Main Literary Award, and the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Memoir. He also wrote the foreword and poems to accompany a series of vintage photographs of Cuba then, rare and classic images from the Ramiro Fernandez collection. He's taught in many prestigious American universities. He's currently Distinguished Visiting Professor at Florida International University, and he lives in Maine. I hope we got all that right, Richard. I hope we didn't make any serious mistakes there. So you're very welcome to our breakfast table today, and we're looking forward to talking to you about Homeland of My Body, which is your new and selected poems published by Beacon Press. And I was thinking, Richard, kind of one point of departure might be your Cuban heritage, since it so richly informs the poetry, but also, I suppose, your sense of who you are, where you are, what America means to you. And just maybe that's the question number one would be, what was it like to grow up a Cubanito in Miami?
Well, yes, it figures very prominently in my entire body of work. As I like to say, I was made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, and imported to the United States. So my mom left Cuba 7 months pregnant, so I claimed my soul to be Cuban, even though I wasn't born there. And in Madrid, I was born in Madrid, and only 45 days after my birth, we emigrated and eventually settled in Miami. So Miami was an interesting place. I say that because I think, every poet is sort of writing one poem all their lives, figuratively, of course. And for me, it's that question of home, belonging, identity, that was with me even when I was in the womb. But growing up in Miami, sort of continued to, that question or that obsession continued to sort of grow in me, because Miami, as I like to explain, it was like growing up between 2 really imagined worlds. One was, of course, the Cuba of my parents, my grandparents, and my community at large. I mean, this was a close-knit exile community. Even though Miami was a big city, we were in a suburb where everybody was Cuban, and so, but it was a sort of a place I had never been, hadn't been born to. So it was something that lived in the imagination, and only through stories and family lore and letters from my family in Cuba, photos, places I've never been really, but it felt like I had been in some ways, right? And then the other really imagined world was America, or the United States, that country that I saw on TV commercials and on movies and in sitcoms, which I really thought existed, but I felt like, okay, I'm American, but I'm not really living in the United States, right? As we like to say in Miami, or the Republic of Miami. We love living here because it's so close to the United States. So all that, negotiating those two sort of mythic homelands or mythic countries was essential to what I would end up as an adult writing about. It was already imprinting in me. Of course, reclaiming the idea of reclaiming my Cuban culture, or claiming it really, was something that became very important. Eventually, I went to Cuba for the first time and started exploring that part of my heritage, my cultural heritage. And eventually, I moved out of the Republic of Miami and also lived up north for about 8 years. The poem that I read, The Gulf Motel, was actually after 8 years of living away from Miami, which I missed terribly. I came back thinking nothing had changed. And of course, in Miami, everything changes every 5 minutes. So it was an idea of place as well. What happens to those places that we lose? But we don't really lose, right? They still exist in our memory.
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem. I love the often comic mix of Cuban heritage and American aspiration. The way, for instance, cooking comes into it a lot. I'm thinking about a poem like America, which is a comic meeting of cuisines, isn't it? It's a battle between pork and turkey and the eventual uneasy Thanksgiving compromise when the turkey and the pork are served and the turkey still has fat, pork fat drippings over it. And as you do say, you were always conscious of that difference, weren't you? You weren't the Brady Bunch. You weren't called Greg or Marsha. So it's that interplay of Cubanness and Americanness. It's always a constant, isn't it?
Yeah, it was like I said that it was partly because of growing up in Miami and growing up in such a huge Cuban community. But there's a couple things to that. One, food figures very prominently in all my work. Something like I read my poems and I get hungry. But part of it's such a cultural signifier,
Yeah.
right? For both, these exotic American foods like turkey,
Yeah.
that wasn't the staples in our home ever, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, whenever we traveled, we'd have to take our Cuban food because, I mean, obviously the 70s and 80s, it wasn't like you can just, they didn't have an ethnic food aisle in the
Yeah.
in the grocery stores, but food, music, all these things that are cultural signifiers begin to play a lot. And I think it's also, I think there might be some misunderstanding here in the United States or maybe everywhere, but the idea that children of immigrants or children who are immigrants themselves, that they grow up loving their given culture. Well, that's not true. The idea is, just psychologically, as a kid, you don't want to be like your parents, right? And so, everything that was Cuban, not that we rejected it, but it was kind of, yeah, but I really want to be American. I don't want to dance salsa and all that. Like, I want to listen to AC/DC and and you too,
Yeah.
And then eventually, I think my body of work, a lot of it is what is that cultural coming of age story. Eventually, we get to that age where we ask that big question: where am I really from? Right?
Yeah.
And for me, that's a very important and complicated question. And then it's a matter of sort of really connecting with your other cultural heritage. And understanding that they're not just dumb stories that your parents and grandparents would tell around the
Yeah.
kitchen table, right? That
Yeah.
it belongs, that it's very much part of you.
Yeah. Well, will you read the poem America for us now, Richard? We'd love to hear it.
Sure. Interestingly enough, this was my very first creative writing assignment in graduate school.
Really?
Yeah, and the assignment was we read Frost, Whitman, Ginsberg, and some others, and the poem was the assignment was write a poem about America, and I thought, what America are these guys talking about? And so I thought, what's the most American thing I could think of? And it was Thanksgiving. There's as I like to say that for Cubans, pork is not the other white meat; it's the only meat. And I always like to say, although this is about being Cuban, and those yearnings, those cultural yearnings, and negotiation. I always like to say also that you don't have to be Cuban to have a dysfunctional Thanksgiving. This is just my version. And I named it, I guess appropriately, America in Spanish. Although Tia Miriam boasted she discovered at least half a dozen uses for peanut butter, topping for guava shells and syrup, butter substitute for Cuban toast, hair conditioner and relaxer, my ma never knew what to make of the monthly 5-pound jars handed out by the immigration department until my friend Jeff mentioned jelly. There was always pork, though, for every birthday and wedding, whole ones on Christmas and New Year's Eves, even on Thanksgiving Day, pork, fried, broiled, or crispy skin roasted, as well as cauldrons of black beans, fried plantain chips, and yuca con mojito. These items required a special visit to Antonio's Mercado on the corner of 8th Street, where men in guayaberas stood in Senate, blaming Kennedy for everything. Este hijo de puta! The bile of Cuban coffee and cigar residue filling the creases of their wrinkled lips, clinging to one another's lives of lost wealth, ashamed and empty as hollow trees. By 7, I had grown suspicious. We were still here. Overheard conversations about returning to Cuba had grown wistful and less frequent. I spoke English. My parents didn't. We didn't live in a two-story house with a maid or wood panel station wagon, nor vacation camping in Colorado. None of the girls in my family had hair of gold. None of my brothers or cousins were named Greg, Peter, or Marcia. We were not the Brady Bunch. And none of the black and white characters on Donna Reed or the Dick Van Dyke Show were named Guadalupe, Lázaro, or Mercedes. Patty Duke's family wasn't like us either. They didn't have pork on Thanksgiving. They ate turkey with cranberry sauce. They didn't have yuca. They had yams, like the dittos of pilgrims I colored in class. So a week before Thanksgiving, I explained to my abuelita about the Indians and the Mayflower, how Lincoln set the slaves free. I explained to my parents about the Purple Mountain's majesty, one if by land, two if by sea, the cherry tree, the tea party, the amber waves of grain, the masses yearning to be free, liberty and justice for all, until finally they agreed. This Thanksgiving, we would have turkey, as well as pork. Abuelita prepared the poor fowl as if committing an act of treason, faking her enthusiasm for my sake. Mama set a frozen pumpkin pie in the oven and prepared candied yams, following instructions I had to translate from the marshmallow bag. The table was arrayed with gladiolas. The plattered turkey loomed at the center in plastic silver from Woolworths. Everyone sat in green velvet chairs we'd upholstered with clear vinyl, except Tio Carlos and Toti, seated in the folding chairs from the Salvation Army. I uttered a bilingual blessing, and the turkey was passed around like a game of Russian roulette. Dry, Gilberto complained, and proceeded to drown the lean slices with pork fat drippings and cranberry jelly, la mierda roja esa, as he called it. Faces fell when Mama presented her ochre pie. Pumpkin, calabaza, was a home remedy for ulcers, not a dessert. Tia Maria made 3 rounds of Cuban coffee. Then Abuela and Pepe cleared the living room furniture, put in a Celia Cruz LP, and the entire family began to merengue over the linoleum of our apartment, sweating rum and coffee, until they remembered. It was 1976 and 46 degrees in America.
That's great. That's great. I think like within all that, I mean, obviously, like because the Spanish language is like, you know, obviously we've talked about food and everything, and all the other kind of cultural signifiers, but Spanish is like it's your personal kind of love and soul language as well. And also thinking of a poem like Translation for Mama, for instance, which is a kind of macaronic poem, reflecting, in a way, like it reflects the fact that the poems for your mother up until that point have been written in English. So then you kind of write that poem in Spanish as well as English. So it must have been interesting, though, for your family to see you become a distinguished American poet and an American poet in English, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. So I use, you know, as you've noticed already, right, I pepper a lot of my poems with Spanish for several reasons. When there are certain things that sort of have no translation. You know, I can't say aunt. That just was something that was never said in my house, right? I can't say mom, you know. So that's part of it. But it's also a poetic device, right? And it's a sound device because if you're going to make a movie about an Italian family, well, you'd expect some Italian in the room, right? Just and I write it in a way that you won't lose the meaning of the poem, but it's really just hearing the Spanish in the poem, whether you know what it means or not, is it's an image, in a sound image, right? So that's one thing. The other thing. Obviously, I was educated in English, so Spanish is not my strongest language, and so I do consider myself an American poet. It just happens. In other words, I think what I write about is in some ways distinctly American, right? The immigrant story. I'm not sure if my parents would have moved to Japan, that I would be considered a Japanese Cuban poet. You know? You just become Japanese, you know, I think. But it's a very unique American story. So that's part of how I consider myself. And again, it's my literary tradition is the United States, right? The concerns of of poets and writers in Latin American countries are very different than mine. Mine is about negotiating identity. There's this, they have their own country, right? I don't have, I have more than one country. So that's part of it. That poem that you referred to in particular, it's interesting. It looks like a literal translation, but what I like to do with my poems is, with poems like that, I'll write like maybe 2 or 3 lines in Spanish, or maybe a whole stanza in Spanish, translate it into English, rework it in the English, retranslate it into Spanish, rework it in the Spanish, translate it a second time into English, and et cetera, until I feel I have said that I've expressed what I want to express the best way in both languages. So the poem is really co-created, and as you can see in the text, it's presented as one poem, right? It's not the poem and the translation. It's a reflection of the bilingual mind and the bicultural mind, because we're often switching back and forth and finding ways. Their expressions, ways of thinking about things in another language that don't exist in one language that doesn't exist in the other, and so it's also a reflection of that.
Yeah, we can understand and come close to that, Richard, as well, because in Ireland, obviously, we've got Gaeilge, and people do speak Os Gaeilge, and if they grow up speaking Irish, they're working in that two-tiered system as well, so we can identify with it. But also, I wanted to ask you about your role as a public poet. In that role, your background has been a kind of an important bridge in a way, hasn't it? And I'm thinking of the Obama inauguration, or when President Biden conferred the National Humanities Medal on you, where he talked about your work bridging cultures and languages and being, I think he said, a mosaic of past, present and future, which is so beautiful to say that. That bridging seems, I think, even more important now, doesn't it?
Yes, very much. It seems that bridging as a both literal and figurative, because as a civil engineer I designed bridges, but it seems my life has always been about bridging things. The Cuban American, of course, 2 languages, 2 cultures, also bridging. I was socialized as a very heteronormative person, so bridging those 2 worlds, in the sense of in the context that you're asking the question, I think about what does it mean to bridge people to poetry as a public figure, and arguably reading, the presidential inauguration is the most public moment in all of maybe in the world, right? It was a million people right in front of me reading a poem to a million people, plus 60 million people on TV, all heard the same poem that day, right? So you can imagine where that catapulted me. But, it's interesting. I couldn't ask for a greater honor. Maybe to me, something like having that kind of public moment is more meaningful to me than even a Pulitzer. I mean, I hope the Pulitzer Prize Committee isn't listening, but because it actually stems to my childhood. One is I finally felt American, right? Like right here, I'm doing something in the most American moment that really defines the United States. That forget 4th of July. This sort of really is part of, or at least it used to be part of what defines our democracy. But then there's also, as a lower working class kid, immigrant parents, I had very little access to the arts, to the humanities, and especially, of course, poetry. So that public persona, so to speak, has allowed me to share poetry in the most unlikely places, like the FDIC. I've read poetry there, and it's giving me a platform to really part of what I'm doing is trying to make sure people have access to poetry at a younger age. And I work with the Academy of American Poets as education ambassador. Where we are right now is the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. To me, it's doubly, perhaps even more traumatic, because my parents fled a country, and so I have. Even though I didn't experience the oppression and the fear and whatnot, I've heard stories all my life, and the parallels are really scary, so scary. And I think in some ways, because most Americans have not experienced that kind of, Latin America, it's like you wake up and there's another dictator. Oh, it's Tuesday. It must be this guy. I think their naivete, right, has allowed this monster to grow. Because I don't think they know anybody. They've never seen it, right? They've never lived what true tyranny is. And so that scares me because it's sort of blindsided. And frankly, it pisses me off too. I mean, this is who you wanted. You voted for them, and I've just been sort of a little just really upset with Americans, right? Like, where did all your values go? And all for the sake of the price of eggs. America's going. Sorry if I'm going on a soapbox here. But, the age of American exceptionalism is just dwindling, and in some ways, I just feel Americans are so spoiled. There's no sense of it's still this kind of me mentality, and not what's great. Even though we're supposed to, be a democracy that out of the many one, we are not there and have been working at it. But the idea that as long as the price of eggs is cheap for me, who cares what happens to women in hospitals? What is that? And I think our country needs to move from this idea of independence that we're still stuck on to an idea of interdependence, right? Where it's like how we all need each other and how we all function and are all part of what makes our quality of life. It depends on the lowliest to the highest, right? It's something that we're not thinking that way, and maybe in the Obama years there was more of that, but this is 20 steps back. So anyway, I How to Love a Country, the book that you mentioned, believe it or not, was written before the 2016 election. Because the seeds of division were already sort of sown, or were already there, have always been in America, but somehow it finds its own balancing act. And so that book is sort of like more important now than it was when it was published, because, poets, I always like to say poets, when things are going good, poets are like, what's wrong? What are we not looking at? And now when things are going bad, in my community of poets, we've been talking a lot about, let's not put more negative energy out there. Let's beauty and joy and finding those moments can be radical as well. Not that we're going to hide bury our heads in the sand, but there's just so much overpowering us with the news every day, and so I'm sort of circling the mountain on where poetry fits right now, in how I'm going to respond to it, and what do we need, right? What do I need and what do we need?
Yeah, but Richard, that is really interesting. I think we need light and hope, don't we? And that's what we need to do. I love that poem by Adam Zagajewski, How to Praise the Mutilated World, which is so it's that balancing thing. You can see what's going on, but at the same time, you're going to praise the world for the goodness that is there. And we have to believe in that, don't we?
I'm getting goosebumps because that has been a favorite poem of mine for about 25 years, I think.
Oh, same here.
I have a signed broadside by him. I got to meet him, and I just posted that poem, and I read it again, and I'm like, I was bawling because it was, poetry can do that, right? You read it, and then some things happen in your life, and you read it again, and you understand it a different way. And this time, I really felt it. I'm like, oh my God. Yes, that's exactly what he's talking about. It's happening right now. It's happening right now.
Yeah.
And he wrote that 25 years ago. Of course, he wrote it in a different context, but here it is. That's what's beautiful about poetry.
Yeah, but Richard, I've been thinking every poetry workshop I do now, I'm going to start with that poem, because I think that's a good way of doing it, isn't it? Spread the balance and the love and the light. That's what we can do. Anyway, Peter, you wanted to ask Richard another question.
No, I wanted to ask, and you refer to it because you refer to the kind of heteronormative society. That was my question. Like growing up gay in Miami. I mean, you're very funny, but also maybe not necessarily funny poem called "Queer Theory According to My Grandmother," which is it's kind of like a list of acceptable hetero masculinity, and it addresses, I suppose, that notion of masculinity and the societal expectations around that. Like it lists, for instance, things deemed inappropriate for men, like drinking soda with a straw, buying from the Avon catalogue, dancing alone, and the grandmother's strict rules obviously kind of reflect her struggle with acceptance, but there's an underlying maybe acknowledgement of the speaker's identity. I don't know. I mean, if that is the case, was it hard to have your identity as a gay man accepted in that culture?
Well, yes, and of course we have to understand that this is going, I was born in 68, so this is, growing up in the 70s and 80s. In general, society was not worth, nobody was coming out in high school or anything like that. But in particular, what this, part of what's, part of some of the layers in this poem are dealing. So let me backtrack a minute. I always thought my sexuality and whatever my struggle and joys with sexuality were a different issue from home and cultural identity and whatnot. And then I realized, no, wait, like these things are totally related, because when one comes out, you of course have to build a new community. You have to reinvent yourself, new friends. You have to find support. You have to learn to, find community and support it, and so you can feel like you can live your life without fear and without shame. And so in a way, it's a different kind of home. But I didn't know how to tell that story, and my grandmother became the way into that story, into those kinds of poems, because my grandmother was a woman who was as xenophobic as she was homophobic. So anything that was culturally odd to her was also queer. So like oatmeal was queer. Sorry to break that to the Irish audience. But, the TV, the Brady Bunch, queer, anything she couldn't wrap her head around, she just thought was weird and therefore queer. So I thought of this idea of cultural sexuality, that one, no two gay men are the same, just like no two people in the world are the same, and our experiences are different. And so part of that is that part of how our cultures inform that homophobia or that acceptance or not acceptance. And so my grandmother, because of those reasons, and she was my primary caretaker, also dealing with layers of machismo, which every society has, but in some it's more prominent, as in Cuban culture, where the idea is that it's all about appearance, right? So the sense of there's a saying in Spanish says, "Es mejor serlo y no parecerlo que parecerlo y no serlo," which means it is more honorable to be gay but not act gay than it is to actually be straight but not gay. So it's all about outward appearance, about the pretense or the affront of being a man, and what does that mean? And so in this poem, my grandmother is sort of giving me sort of Laertes' advice to Plutonian, like here's how you do it. And it's weird because it's a love-hate. There is this kind of verbal trauma, verbal abuse, but also she was my best friend, and also she's hilarious and funny and also loving, because in a sense she was trying to protect me, right? She was, for a woman of that age, during that age, right? So anyway, it's in her voice, a persona poem, so that it worked much better than when I was just writing it in third person, because I wasn't getting her character right, like you were saying, and she just sounded like she was just a mean person, but she was also my best friend. So anyway, well, all those layers are in here. Queer theory, according to my grandmother. Never drink your soda with a straw. Men don't use straws. Milkshakes? Maybe. Stop by your mother's Avon catalog and the men's underwear in those Sears flyers. I've seen you. Stay out of her Tupperware parties and perfume bottles. Don't let her kiss you. She kisses you much too much. Avoid hugging men, but if you must, pat them real hard on the back, even if it's your father. Must you keep that cat? Don't pet him so much. Why don't you like dogs? Never play house, even if you're the husband, and quit hanging out with that Henry kid. He's too pale, and I don't care what you call them, those G.I. Joes of his are dolls. Don't draw rainbows or sunsets or flowers. I've seen you. Don't draw at all. No coloring books either. Put away your crayons, your Play-Doh, your Legos. Wear your Hot Wheels, your laser gun and handcuffs, those knives I gave you for Christmas. Never fly a kite or roller skate, but light all the firecrackers you want. Kill all the lizards you can. Cut up worms and feed them to that cat of yours. Don't sit Indian style with your legs crossed. You're no Indio. and stop click-clacking your sandals like some Tropicana chorus girl. And for God's sake, never, ever pee sitting down. I've seen you. Never take a bubble bath or wash your hair with shampoo. Shampoo is for women. So is conditioner, so is mousse, so is hand lotion. Never file your nails or blow dry your hair. Go to the barber shop with your abuelo. You're not unisex, are you? Stay out of the kitchen. Los hombres don't cook. They eat. Eat anything you want, except deviled eggs, blow pops, croissants, bagels, maybe, cucumber sandwiches, and those little petite fours. Don't watch Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie. Don't stare at the $6 million man. I've seen you. Never dance alone in your room. Donna Summer, Barry Manilow, The Captain, Antonio, Bette Midler, and all musicals forbidden. Posters of kittens, Star Wars, or the Eiffel Tower forbidden. Those fancy books on architecture and art, I threw them in the trash. No, you can't wear cologne or puka shells, and I better not catch you in clogs. If you grow a ponytail, I'll cut it off. What? No, you can't pierce your ear, left or right side. I don't care. You will not look like a goddamn queer. I've seen you, even though I know you are one.
Good on you, Richard. That was great to hear that. Okay, so follow that, as we'd say over here, but it's hard to. But I did want to ask you, because we're coming close to the end now, Richard. You'd mentioned earlier that you you had worked as an engineer as well, a structural engineer. I'm thinking there are lots of poets who've had jobs. Philip Larkin was a librarian. The Swedish poet Thomas Transformer was a psychologist. Your engineering, how did that actually impinge on your work as a poet? Do they help each other in any way?
They do. Well, first of all, it's not like I really had a choice. Again, working class family. So, I would confess that I was one of those weird kids that loved everything, a very left brain, right brain. I got an A or A minus in all subjects, except physical education as a queer kid. And so I loved math, and it was a natural kind of, more traditional career. Your parents, so you have a better life than we did, et cetera, et cetera. But lo and behold, when I started working my consulting firm, about half my job was writing. Writing reports, studies, letters, and most importantly, proposals for jobs that were nothing but a narrative and of your vision for the project. And so that's actually when I really started getting interested in writing. And then I always want to do something creative on the side, so to speak, as just for my own, following my own intellectual and creative curiosities. And so I just started writing poetry out of the blue. But what I've found over the years is that, we don't recognize. Yes, perhaps in the early stages of a poem, it's all like cigarettes and martinis, and letting the imagination flow and whatnot. But there's so much left brain activity going on, really in every human endeavor, in writing a poem. At some point, what I'm looking for in a poem is structure, form, logic. How do I break that logic, create it, and then break it? How do I turn the poem? And to me, sometimes it feels just like doing a math problem. To me, a poem is kind of an emotional math problem or an emotional geometric proof, so to speak, where every line does something, and at some point there's the turn, and then and then it resolves itself, right? So that's worked out, and then writing more poetry made me a better writer at the office, but also made me a better judge of folks, my clients. There are a lot of people skills that you needed as a senior engineer. Maybe 10% of my job was engineering. The rest was client relations, managing people, which you need other kinds of skill sets. And the poetry made me more sensitive to sort of what makes humans tick, and more sensitive to who they are, what their needs are, and how to negotiate with them emotionally. And you wouldn't think that happens in engineering, but it does.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I had a brother in my family as well who became an engineer. So we've a poet and engineer in our house as well. But I was useless at maths. So it's so interesting to hear that. But I think Margaret Atwood said that poetry is closer to mathematics than music. And I've always agreed with that as a definition. Yeah.
Totally. And music especially, right? Because it's so mathematical, and they say when you hear a song that the right side remembers the melody and the left side remembers the words, and then those two things come together. I read that somewhere. I don't know if I'm not going to verify, but I feel math taught me just as much about writing a poem as English did, in a different way, obviously, right? But
well, a last question I have. Richard, I mean, it's kind of something you mentioned earlier. I mean, we're very much aware always of the kind of search, the quest for home and homeland. And in the final part of the book, we're very much aware of that too. And I wonder, maybe you might end by reading the title poem, the homeland of my body.
Right, sure. And the latest poems, every book has sort of presented some facet of my relationship with home, because of course that keeps on changing. Home is like asking what is love, right? And then that changes as you experience different things, as circumstances in your life happen. And where I'm at in this book now is that, in the new poems at least, is that I've realized I've never lost a home. Right, that it always exists somehow in me. And so my sense of home is now anywhere, that I always carry those things in my body, hence the title, Homeland of My Body. And this is the title poem, which I think reflects that. For the homeland of my body, for my ears, still these ears, lullabied by Madrid's rains the day I was born into the tempest of my parents' exile, holding their lost Cuba in their arms along with me. For my hands, still these hands, sculpting sandcastles guarded by the seagulls and palm trees that raised me to reach for the sun, to be as confident as Miami's skyscrapers, rising as I did. For my feet, still these feet, wandering forever through my father's sugarcane fields, tousled by the wind of his dead voice blowing with stories of the sweet sour life his machete earned for him, for me. For my lungs, still these lungs, breathing the scent of mangoes my mother peddled by dirt roads to pay for her school books. The dust in her eyes graced by the sea-green Caribbean, still humming the island of her life. For my eyes, still these eyes, peering back into the sparkling shore I left for the stark brick of New England walls, and closing years of my loneliness, quiet as the snow-covered fields outside my window. For my lips, still these lips, swaying to carnival... Sorry, let me write down. I put lips for some reason. For my hips, still these hips, swaying to carnival drums with the Brazilian lover whose samba pulsed through me. Let me lust for the hills and valleys of his body, only to let it all go. For my veins, still these veins, coursing through me like the canals of a sinking city, the cobblestone maze of its streets led me to lose myself in the echoes of my own footsteps. For my legs, still these legs, standing at the mouth of a volcano, kissing a man I'll fall in love with, fiery and gorgeous as the lava at our feet, as the sunsets above the home we'll build nested in the thick bones of northern pines. For my flesh, still this flesh, alive with all the places I have ever loved or lost, or have yet to find and lose, this constant homeland of my body, wherein all my homelands reside at once, as they will do until my body's memory disappears into the dust of my own dust.
Oh, Richard Blanco, that was absolutely beautiful. That was Richard reading the title poem of his book, Homeland of My Body, New and Selected Poems, published by Beacon Press. And as usual, all details will be available on booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. Richard, thanks for coming to the breakfast table today.
Thank you. It was lovely, so lovely. And I just want to say, The kinship between the Cuban and the Irish is just amazing. The last time I left Ireland, I left crying. There's something about traumatized islands. I think we have a sense of an exilic identity, right? It's just so beautiful. Such a really authentic emotion. Maybe it's because of the poetry that unites us as well. So thank you everyone for being who you are out there.
So that was Richard Blanco. And now on to Strokestown. So, Enda, what's happening at the Strokestown Poetry Festival?
Yes, Peter. Well, before I begin listing what's happening this May Bank Holiday weekend down at the Strokestown Festival, I would like to congratulate Director Joseph Woods. He always runs a very dynamic programme, and the committee, of course, down there, Anne O'Leary and everyone else. So we're really looking forward to it. So Friday the 2nd of May, there's going to be a poetry reading and a launch with Trish Bennett, Patrick Chapman and Noelle Linsky. Then we're going to head to the cafe for the official opening reception. That sounds exciting. And at 8:30 in the cafe again, we will be hearing Katie Donovan, Mark Granier and Luke Morgan, 3 really great and exciting poets reading from new books. And of course, then you can't go to Strokestown without going to Compton's Central Bar on Bridge Street for the Strokestown Open Mic and Music Night on the first night, Friday the 2nd. Peter, it sounds like a great opening, doesn't it? Are there any other events that you're really looking forward to over the weekend down in Strokestown?
There's a few, but tell us, because I know you're also doing a workshop yourself on the Saturday, poetry workshop, making a poem. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm really looking forward to doing that, actually. It's taking place in the attic over the cafe in Strokestown House. And I have to say, Strokestown House is such an inspiring place. So if anyone's listening, do come down to the festival because it's really energetic time down there for poetry lovers. But yeah, from 11 in the morning until 1, I'll be upstairs in the attic working with poets, and we'll be talking about poetry. Hopefully we'll be having some fun as well as doing workshops of the poems that the poets have submitted. So yeah, that'll be fun up in the attic where great poetry will take place. I'm looking forward to that poetry workshop on Saturday.
And I noticed, anybody who listened to our last podcast would have heard Mary O'Donnell talking about a new publisher, Maca Press, and there's also a Revival Press. I'm seeing an event here, New Voices, new work from Maca and Revival Press, and that's happening also on Saturday.
Yeah, Revival Press is a great press, actually, based in Limerick. And also Maca Press has just begun publishing. They're based up in Belfast. And so, yeah, we'll be able to go along and hear New Voice at 12:15 in the stables. Sam Furlong, Bernadette Gallagher and Ailish Martin. Looking forward to that. Also, Peter, it's a really important festival, I think, this year because the theme is in memory of Marilee Harper. Can you tell us a little bit about who Marilee Harper was?
Well, I suppose Marilee Harper is kind of the presiding, for many years was the kind of presiding spirit of the festival. She founded it. She came to, she moved to Roscommon. I think she's been living in Cork, and she moved to Strokestown, or the area of Strokestown, living on Strokestown's, if not Roscommon's only mountain, in that little cottage with its maze and everything, kind of a magical place. But anyway, she founded the festival. And kind of locals wrote in and helped, but it was very much Marilee who kind of put it on the map.
Oh, she was such a talented and lovely woman, and it's really sad that she's left us. And of course, she is the sister of James Harper, the poet. And on the Saturday night at 8:30 in the cafe, there will be an evening of poetry, memories and music with special guests in tribute to Marilee Harper. So do come along to that.
One of the big events is the competition and the shortlisting of the poets and the announcement of the prize and all that. But we have also, before we get to that, there are readings from Noel Monaghan, who featured on this podcast. Do you remember this time, kind of last year? Kate Newman is reading as well. There's readings from Peter Carpenter, a very interesting poet and publisher from Britain. And Vonag Rourke, of course, will be well known to many as well. And they're happening on the Saturday. And also there's a film screening of films by the Scottish filmmaker and writer Lawrence Henson. So again, a lot of things happening on that Saturday.
Yeah, and also I'm looking forward to readings by Paddy Bush, by Nuala O'Connor and Jared Smith. They're going to be the final reading. But before we even get to there's so much on, isn't there, Peter? You'll also be giving a talk, won't you? It's the Joan McBreen talk. Joan McBreen has kindly supported this lecture, which takes place every year in the festival, a lecture that a guest speaker comes in and talks about poetry. And you're the guest poet this year. What will you be talking about, Peter?
Well, I've called it the life of the poet, and so it's kind of like how would you, I suppose, what is the life of the poet like? How does it intersect with the life of a poem? How much do we need to know about a poet to appreciate the poem? All that kind of stuff. To what extent are poems sort of independent republics, gladly running away from the constraints of biography? So it's all of that kind of stuff. You know, why are some poets silent for so long, and what is the kind of connection between silence and poetry, if any? So just kind of exploring all that stuff.
Oh, sounds interesting. And it's at 4:00 in the stables, isn't it? In Strokestown
That's
House.
indeed, yeah. Yeah, it's 4 o'clock in the day, 1,600 hours, I'm saying.
1,600 hours. Okay. And you know, an event that I really enjoy going to, it's an institution really, is on Sunday morning at 12:15. Elaine Quillen, the poet, always appears down in Strokestown for the launch of Ciphers. And Elaine has reached Ciphers number 99. Can you believe it? And I think 100 is sadly going to be the last one. So do come along to the launch of that at 12:15 on Sunday, the 4th of May. Now, Peter, the Strokestown International Poetry Competition announcement is always an event of great excitement, isn't it, at the festival?
Oh yeah, look, I can remember lots of. I mean, it was always one of the kind of highlights, or if not the highlight of the event in the past. You know, vast numbers would gather in the house and the judges would go through the entries, and then finally there would be the announcement of the winner.
Yeah, huge excitement. Well, this year it's happening in the stables, not sadly in the house, but it's still a beautiful venue. And the poet Jane Clark is going to announce the winner of the 2025 Strokestown International Poetry Competition. And there's going to be readings as well from the shortlist of poets. But we are lucky today because we actually have recordings from the shortlist of poets. It would be nice to put them on, wouldn't it, Peter?
Yeah, and maybe we could run a kind of little betting shop. So kind of so have a listen to these and then see what you think and put some money on who you think the winner should be.
Okay, well, I think we'll start off with Judy O'Kane. Congratulations, Judy, because your poem On Leaving has been shortlisted by this year's judge, the poet Jane Clark. And we'll put it on, will we, and listen to her.
Let's have a listen to that.
This is Judy O'Kane reading On Leaving. This poem goes back to Burgundy, to an exchange of winemakers from France and New Zealand who are very dear to me. On Leaving. The car pulls out of Place de Carnot. The carousel is closed for the season. Soon the rain will wash away what remains of the Abbey of Saint-Vivant from our boots. From the train, vineyards flow down the hillsides in lines of gold. For days, wine growers, pioneers and pilgrims in Maori and in French sang songs of love of their land. On the oaked coat they danced to jazz bands surrounded by magnums strewn in nightlights. On tabletops they danced the complicated ritual of terroir, a rite, a religion. For the briefest of moments, all of this came into focus. The fall of light on the Côte d'Or, the patterns of climat, each parcel of land recognised and mapped. All of this will fall away, like fluency in a language not spoken frequently, to occupy some distant space, still not entirely lost. Clos Vougeot disappears from view. At Dijon we change trains. At Paris we will go our separate ways. I'm delighted to have this poem shortlisted at Strokestown, and I'm actually recording this from the Irish College in Paris, and I'm about to head south. So I'm really sorry to be missing the festival, and I hope it's absolutely fantastic. Many thanks.
So that was Judy O'Kane reading On Leaving. And I really like that idea of changing trains at Dijon and at Paris, going your separate ways. That's very interesting and defined ending to that poem. Well, the next poet we're going to listen to now is Paul McMahon. Congratulations to him too. And his poem, Driving Across the Humber Bridge, has been shortlisted for this year's 2025 Strokestown International Poetry Competition. And here is Paul reading his poem.
This is Paul McMahon, and I'm reading my poem that was shortlisted in the Strokestown International Poetry Prize, called Driving Across the Humber Bridge. Driving across the Humber Bridge, my ex-girlfriend tells me In Spanish, the verb to hope is also the verb to wait. We were travelling from Barton upon Humber on the south bank and headed towards Hessel on the north bank. She was smiling but shaking her head at the same time while gripping the wheel as the morning sun shone in on the right side of her face through the strands of suspension cables strung like the skeleton of an upended piano. And when I asked her which comes first, she said hope. Then she stopped smiling and began nodding out front at the white road markings flying by like we were the bird shadowing Hansel, swallowing the breadcrumbs that show the way home. And I prayed for those little bones we'd never get to bury as we approached the shoreline of Hessel, the harbour, the pier, the sandy beach, and I knew it was somewhere that we would never reach.
Thought that was really, really interesting poem as well. It's hard to decide, really. It's a tough shortlist, isn't it? So we're moving on now to Olga Dermot Bond, and she's written a poem called René Laennec Remembers the Day He Dreamt a Stethoscope. What an amazing title. So let's listen to Olga read her poem now.
I'm Olga. My poem is about the man who invented the world's first stethoscope. His name was René Laennec, and he was a young French doctor working in Paris in 1816. And he was faced with a young female patient who was having really bad problems breathing. And he thought to himself, wouldn't it be amazing if I could really listen properly to her heart? And that inspired him to create the world's first stethoscope, which you can see in the Science Museum. It looks more like a telescope, really. Just quite an incredible invention that changed the world of medicine forever. So this is my poem, which is called René Laennec Remembers the Day He Dreamt a Stethoscope. The girl was young, embarrassed, a bluish tinge around her lips like dried lavender, labouring for each breath. I imagined being able to listen to her heart, that small fist of pandemonium, of being able to bring those distant muffled hooves nearer to me, to canter their rhythm in my ear. I dreamt then of my stethos kopos, special as Galileo's glass, a listening piece of wonder that would allow me to track that beautiful stricken animal hidden inside her chest, as if through sound I could place my hand on her struggling heart, feel it riding side saddle, limping lopsided across the field of her body. Yes, it was as if I had imagined a new landscape, fog lifting inside her, feeling damp ground, rivulets and rabbit holes, ready to encounter the marvel of her trembling flawed centre that was whispering so quietly, alive, alive, alive.
Oh, Peter and I are having a hard time here trying to guess who Jane has chosen. Hard. Of course, I was judged last year. I remember being judged last year and it was a great event. I really enjoyed it. Of course, when you get to the top 5, it's really brilliant to be there. But unfortunately, I suppose there has to be a winner. But we're going to move on now to Winifred McNulty, and she has written a poem called Footfall. And here's Winifred reading that poem.
This poem, Footfall, started in a field in Tawley, County Leitrim, where my parents and we had a home, but I was also brought up in Leicester. So it travels between the two through the idea of my mother's collection of small stools. And what it looks at, and I suppose what I'm always looking at in my writing, is how we belong, and how place affects us, and how people, and the Irish in Britain in particular, how they survived. Some of them held a sense of Ireland as home, and how that story affected the second generation like myself. And also how it affected people who couldn't balance the two, who couldn't live in one place and think in another. So that's where the poem comes from, and I'm really thrilled that it's been shortlisted for Strokestown. Strokestown is a gorgeous festival of poetry and friendship and connection between writers and poets and those who love poetry. It's held in an amazing house and museum in County Roscommon. So I'm really delighted that the poem has travelled to the shortlist in the festival. Footfall. Steps, the width of a breath, measure grass and gaps to the small field for a calf. I follow your tracks, tracing the notation of stone in a shed where phrases are musky, full of cow's breath, the dash of milk into a bucket, your face soft against her hide. My mother gathered small stools all her life to sit in comfortable rooms, her face level with Brownie's wide flank, just out of reach of the kick of the bucket, just inside a song she knew once, embedded like language, full of silence, winter sea and a raw wind, a wild song. Some heard it fainter and fainter, an echo in red brick streets. So they went out to the parks, lay there all night to see if they could hear it better, to see could they follow it back.
Peter is sitting here beside me. The dog is snoring. He's nodding away in enthusiasm. So, unfortunately, Matthew Wimberley, I don't think we have a recording of him reading his poem, but perhaps, Peter, you might like to read it. This poem is called Americana, and here is Peter Sir reading the short listed poem by Matthew Wimberley for this year's Strokestown Poetry Competition.
Americana. Under this layman's music, I hear the rattle of my stepfather's keys in the understory of boyhood as he heads out for the 10-hour day, sun just hitting the clouds, blushed, brilliant, as hands in the near zero cold. The wind is working for time and a half. It makes me nervous to hear it now and then, hours soaking his collar and armpits, making his t-shirt tighter. Shadow, the oldest measure of time, him with grease under his nails, a socket wrench between his teeth, humming Steppenwolf to pass 5 or 6 minutes. He did it like this for years, so I wouldn't go hungry, so I could be bored even, could crawl all summer through leaf fall, come home late, having no clue it was dinner time, so I could stop to notice the first punch of wind in the pines, a worker clocking in after the slow drive, sitting in his truck to catch the last guitar riff of a song from another life, Rowan Mountain and a shim of moon in the rear view, holding up the crooked dark.
And that was the last of the shortlisted 5 poems. That was Matthew Wimberley's poem, Americana. And do come along to hear the winner of the Strokestown International Poetry Competition being announced at the Strokestown Festival on Sunday, the 4th of May at 2 p.m. at the Stables, and poet Jane Clark will be there to announce that winner. I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley, and I have Peter Sir here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
We'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.